Hey there, today I want to talk about how I fit nearly all of my Multicraftual yarn activities in this attic space, and also how you can organize your space as well. Hey there, thank you so much for being here today. I am Felicia from SweetGeorgia and the School of SweetGeorgia, and I am a longtime knitter, weaver, spinner, dyer, crochet-ish, and now new machine knitter. There's a lot of crafts that I do. There's a lot of yarn crafts specifically that I do. And so I have a lot of yarn, a lot of equipment, a lot of various different kinds of tools and things that are needed in order to do the crafts that I do. And so today I want to talk about how I fit all of those pieces in this room. Well, nearly all of the pieces, I'll show you. Nearly all the pieces in this room of my attic. It's probably about, the floor plan says it's about 300 square feet, but it's really not 300 square feet because you can see the roof here is completely slanted. And so the slant of this attic means that a lot of the space on both sides of this room are very difficult to access. And so that cuts into definitely a lot of the square footage and the space that we have to work with. But in any case, I do manage to have one weaving loom set up in here. There used to be two. And I have 1, 2, 3 knitting machines currently set up. There is a sewing machine in the back and a serger in the back. And I still have a number of other bits and pieces of weaving equipment and tools and things like that in here as well. And there's an entire section here that is all yarn stash. So I'm going to show you all of these different sections and explain to you a little bit more about them. Now, given that there's like a lot of different kinds of yarn activities, from spinning, which requires spinning fiber, requires a spinning wheel, maybe requires lazy Kates, maybe requires certain kind of bobbins, special kind of bobbins for different kinds of wheels, all sorts of things like that. So there's the spinning side of things. Then there's also the weaving side of things. Weaving requires a loom, requires shuttles, requires maybe a warping board, requires other kinds of bobbins, requires bobbin winding tools, all sorts of things like that. So there's a weaving sort of area of things. And then with knitting, there's obviously knitting needles, interchangeable knitting needles, maybe knitting accessories like stitch markers, those kinds of things. And then a lot of yarn. Of course, crochet also requires crochet hooks, so we have a little section for that. And yeah, lots and lots of yarn. And with the machine knitting, you can see the machine knitting has kind of taken over my central table here. This used to be a table where I used to film tutorials and top-down tutorials, but this entire space is being taken over by machine knitting. So on either side of this table is a knitting machine, each one with a ribber. So this one on this side is an SK360, which is a standard gauge machine. It basically knits fingering weight, lace weight, all of that kind of stuff really, really well. And then on the other side is the SK155, and that is a bulky weight machine. So that is everything from DK, worsted, chunky weight yarn. It knits up all of those things really, really well. Now, I like that particular machine because I use multiple strands of fingering weight, multiple strands of DK weight together to make thicker yarns, and that works really, really well on that particular machine. So that's why there's two of them. Each one has a ribber setup as well. With machine knitting comes with also a plethora of accessories and tools, including weights and cast-on combs and different arms and so many different bits and pieces. So in order to keep all of these different crafts a little bit separate and a little bit more organized and more tidy, what I've done is I've created stations inside my house. So I think of my craft areas kind of like you might think of a restaurant kitchen. If you go into a restaurant kitchen needs to be able to make a variety of different kinds of foods. Maybe it's making salads, maybe it's making soup, maybe you're making entrees, maybe you're grilling meat, maybe you are baking something, maybe you're baking bread or whatever. Maybe you have a dessert station, maybe you have a cold prep station or a sauce station or whatever it is. In any case, there are different areas of the kitchen that are designated for different tasks. So one part of the kitchen might be just for making salads, making salad prep or cold items. And then the other section might be just for grilling. So that anytime you're grilling meat, you're at that station. And the idea is that all of the tools that you need for that one activity are close by for that activity. So in order to keep all of my tools and accessories close by for whichever activity I happen to be doing, I have a lot of these craft carts set up. So this is, it's called the Raskog cart, and it comes from IKEA. I have a number of these throughout the house, and each cart is designated for a different activity. So in this case, this entire cart is designated for machine knitting. So all of the little bits and pieces, the little tools that I need for machine knitting are in here. I also have them separated here inside the caddy with a bit of a divider system. So this whole section here, this is for the fine gauge machine or the standard gauge machine. And then this whole cart divider here, this one is for the bulky weight machine, because the tools are different, the size of the tools are different, and so I have to keep them separated and organized into their different areas. There's a spot for weights. So with the craft caddy, I can obviously just wheel this around to wherever I need this to be. There's 2 other levels here, and so on the different levels of the craft caddy, I also have the different carriages. So if I have like a lace carriage or maybe the ribber arm or different bits and pieces of the various machines, I have one layer designated for one of the machines and then the other layers designated for the other machine. And so this craft caddy just goes around the table with me wherever I need it, if I'm working on this machine or on that machine. Now, the bane of my existence is converting yarn from skeins to balls in order to use it for various things. In order to do that, you need to have a Swift. You need to have a device or a piece of equipment that holds your yarn open, holds the skein of yarn open, so that you can wind it into a ball or a cone or whatever you need it to be. This is the only Swift that I have ever fallen in love with. This is the Ultra Umbrella Swift, I think it's called, from Shacked. And so Shacked makes this Swift. You can have it upright like this, or you can have it horizontal like this. For the most part, I typically have it open horizontally. So what I do is I have this set up here in order to wind my yarn, and then my weaving bench here from the Louet spring loom. The weaving bench doubles as the place where I wind all of the balls of yarn. So my winding yarn setup basically looks like this. It goes from here to this ball winder here. If you're going to do any amount of knitting from hand-dyed skeins or from yarn that comes in skeins, you must get one of these and one of these. So the loom that I still have here in the attic is the Louet spring loom. This is a 110 centimeter wide loom, which is approximately 44 inches. Now, I used to have another loom up here, but that Shacked Baby Wolf has been moved to the studio where we do a lot of the filming for the courses for the School of SweetGeorgia. And so that loom would still fit in this room. I could definitely make space for it, but right now in the attic there is just this one loom. Now this one is really, really nice. It's very popular. It is a counter marsh loom, which means that every time you step on a treadle, shafts will go up and go down at the same time, making a big open shed. This is a beautiful loom. This is the original one. There's a version 2 of the spring loom that's come out recently, but this is still the original one. I got this one back in 2006. So one of the things that I really like about this loom is that it's very, very lightweight. So I can actually just pick it up with one hand and slide it around to wherever I need it. That may or may not be a good thing. I feel like this loom is not necessarily a loom I would use to weave rugs. I would weave silk scarves and finer things, more delicate things that don't require really, really heavy beading. I feel like the heavy beading would cause the loom to sort of move around the room. But the way it is, having this nice light loom in here means that I can slide it under this diagonal sloped roof area of the attic, and it tucks away quite nicely when I'm weaving. If I need to actually beam the loom and then stand at the back of the loom and dress the loom and those kinds of things, I can just pull the loom out into any free space, work on it, and then tuck it back into this space. So that part of it, being able to slide and move this loom around, is very, very handy. Now, right behind me here, that is where I do all of the bobbin winding for the shuttles for weaving. So having everything in this general vicinity is really great, because then if I'm weaving and I need to have another bobbin, then I just turn around and I can wind some bobbins and get started. So I don't have to like walk all over the room or go downstairs or anything like that. Everything is right here. One of the things that I'm super thankful for is the book collection that I have gradually over the years started to pull together. And so up here in the attic, I store all of the knitting books. So there are books here, including like Vogue knitting books, there's Alice Starmore books, colorwork books, Elizabeth Zimmerman books. I have a collection of old Rowan magazines that I love. These are all books about designing your own sweaters and things. There's a lace section. Over here, I've started to keep machine knitting books and things. Up here, there's a whole section on just sock knitting books. I have, over the years, de-stashed a lot of books, but for the most part, I keep a lot of technique books. I keep books that I feel like are evergreen, that are really classic, that have techniques and knowledge that I will be able to use forever and ever. So in this corner next to the window, I have a sewing machine and a serger. Now, these things come in extremely handy with a lot of weaving projects in terms of taking the fabric or taking the samples, being able to serge and finish the ends. I use the sewing machine to hem towels, those kinds of things. In the past, this one I actually bought because I was quilting and I was doing a ton of quilting, and I wanted something that had this sort of large flat bed so that I could do sort of free form quilting. But since then, I've used this for sewing garments. I've used it for a lot of finishing for hand woven things. And so having this station here is really, really also very handy. And you can see Nina uses it to do her perler beads as well. Okay, so welcome to my yarn stash. You can see the yarn stash is in bins down here. There's many, many bins. And then there's also a section here with shelves, and that is also yarn stash. Now, you can see that the ceiling here is very low, it's very slanted, and it comes straight down. So like there's no way to even stand up in this area. You would bonk your head. And so that's why the yarn stash is in bins and tucked underneath here, because this is the least accessible space. You can't walk in this area at all. But I have all of this stuff, all of the yarns, they're all separated and organized and divided into the types of yarn that they are. So for example, this bin here, this is all mohair yarn. So I don't have them arranged nicely, but this is all various kinds of mohair yarn that would be used to carry along with other yarns for whatever project. So these ones are yarns that I actually bought in Japan. Lace weight mohair yarn that's in variegated colors. I love this stuff. This is our silk mist, which we dye at the studio, and this is also beautiful. It's mohair and silk blended together. I love that color. This is some Fiber Space Cumulus that followed me home. Again, more silk mist. And then I also have some thicker mohair that I used to use for weaving blankets, and all of that stuff is stored in here so that I can use it for future projects. I love it. Also, this past January, I managed to de-stash a ton of my spinning fiber. So now currently I just have 2 bins of spinning fiber. 2 bins of spinning fiber. A lot of these things are like Fiber Club that I dyed many, many years ago. This one is June 2017. This colorway was called Glamping. Over here, this is all the worsted yarn. So I put in here, actually, there's the Mohair Silk DK. I put it in here because it knits up better at a worsted weight, at a heavier weight. So I put that in here. There's some superwash worsted in here, and some experimental yarns that we tested in the past. This one has a bit of silk and alpaca in it. Oh, look. And apparently my punch needle tools are in here too. This is my entire bin of BFL and Silk Fine. The whole thing is BFL and Silk Fine. And some of it is because there was a sweater that I was going to make in BFL and Silk Fine in the blue canoe, and I started the pattern. It's in here, but I didn't like how it was going, and so I want to reuse this yarn for a different project. We also did a ton of testing of colors for the cabin blanket that I wove for the double weave class, and so there's a lot of skeins in here that are all test skeins from that project. So there's a lot of test skeins in here, the light color, the dark color, and so there's enough skeins in here to actually make several sweaters. So many colors in here. But I love the texture of the yarn. I love that it's a little bit toothy. I love that it's really woolly feeling. And so this is something that I want to actually use more for color work projects this year. So that's why it's got its own bin. And if you can believe it, I only have one bin of sock yarn. Actually, it's not really true. I have more sock yarn downstairs. These are all sock yarns that I've collected from over the years. This is actually one that we had a mill spin for us using our honey fig colorway. It was fiber that we sent out, had it spun into yarn, but this mill no longer exists, so we can't make this anymore. But this is something that we tried to do many years ago. And just saving that for maybe the day that I can crank that into some socks on the machine. If you've been knitting and spinning and dyeing for almost 20 years, you are bound to save things for a long time. So here in this little alcove, these shelves were built into this little corner when we moved into the house. So we just continue to use them as is. Up here, I have a lot of the binders. All these binders contain sort of analog notes, documentation for the projects that I'm doing for weaving, for knitting, for all of that kind of stuff. Up here is a bin of all the knitting needles. They don't look that organized, but it's actually, I'm not doing a ton of hand knitting right now, so I don't need to dig around for knitting needles very often, but that is where they're all stored. So any random knitting needle that I find in the house goes into this bin so that I can find it later. All the crochet hooks are now in here. I was testing different types of crochet hooks, and so there's a number of different kinds, different brands in here, but every crochet hook goes into this bin now. Here is all of the 8/2 cotton that I have. There's a ton of 8/2 cotton. I've tried to organize it in rainbow color order so that it will be more helpful for when I go to design things. I know exactly what I can sort of pick and use. There's also some random cotton yarns in here. So there's some bamboo yarns in here, seine twine, cotton seine twine. Mop cotton is all in this bin. In this one is all linen and linen blends. So this one is actually our flax and silk fine. It is linen and silk blended together, and I'm using this actually as the pattern weft for some of the crackle weaving that I'm doing downstairs. And so I love this yarn. In any case, so because it's a linen blend, I just put it in here because it doesn't really fit anywhere else in the yarn stash. I've been trying to do something this year, which is I labeled this box Yarn 2023. And so the idea is that this yarn is kind of on deck. This is yarn that I want to actually make something with this year. So the goal is I have 3 skeins here of this Tough Love sock in this one particular color. I have a skein of this mohair silk sock, which is absolutely gorgeous. This is my favorite color. This is the mulberry color mohair silk sock. Maybe this becomes socks for me. I don't know. I made a pair of socks for my mom in this color recently. There are 2 Party of 5 packages in here that have been in my stash for a long time, and so this requires me to do something with it because it's so pretty. I want to do something with it. This one is the throwback colorway. I definitely could make something nice with that. And this one is the escape color. So those 2 I want to use this year. All of these skeins I want to use this year. There is a double sock blank that I had over dyed a couple of years ago that I think would be really interesting to crank into socks at some point. And I have all of this hand spun yarn that I have been trying to make into a shawl, and I keep ripping it out. I think I've ripped it out 6 times. And so this needs to become something this year. Maybe it becomes something in my weaving. So we'll see how this all goes. But the idea is that out of this entire sort of collection of stash yarns that I've kept for almost 20 years, I'm picking out skeins that are the most interesting to me right now. And so those are the things that I want to have on deck to make with first this year. And hopefully by the end of the year, I will have made it through this little bin of yarn. You can keep me accountable. So that is basically all the way around this attic space. There's yarn stash on one side, there's weaving loom and weaving tools on the other side, and in the middle is all of the knitting machines and all of the tools required for the knitting machines. At the back end is all the library books, and in the back corner is a sewing machine and a serger. So that is this space upstairs. I feel like I have maximized every single corner of this space. I love this space. I wish I could spend much more time in this space. I actually took a little corner of the table, this middle table, in the space between the two knitting machines. Sometimes I put a little laptop and we'll do meetings and things like that from up here as well. I just love this space. So downstairs, I do actually have another loom setup. It's a Leclerc Fanny, the 27-inch wide loom, and I have it right now positioned in the corner so that it can be next to the window so I can get some natural light. Especially in the winter time, it's very, very dark, and so just anything that you can do to get closer to some natural light is fantastic. So I have it positioned there so that I can see my weaving a little bit more clearly. And again, right next to that loom, there is another caddy, an IKEA cart, and on that are all of the shuttles, all the bobbins, any extra yarn, all sorts of things are on that cart for the weaving loom. And finally, the last little bit is that in the living room, I have the Erlbacher Speedster, the CSM, the circular sock knitting machine. It's set up on a little table that came from Erlbacher, and I have that set up and I just basically carry that table around with the CSM to wherever I need it to be. And so I tuck it away at the side of the walls during the daytime. But at nighttime, if I'm maybe cranking a sock while I'm watching TV, then I just pull the table out. Again, next to the sock knitting machine table, I have another IKEA cart, which has all of the CSM tools. The CSM actually comes with a lot of different accessories as well. I think given the machine knitting nature of it, there's a lot of pieces. So there's multiple cylinders with ribbers, and there are individual tools, there's weights, there's a whole bunch of different things that you need for working the circular sock knitting machine. So all of that stuff lives on that craft cart, and again, I drag that around wherever I need it. So I do have two wheels at home. One of them is a Lendrum Saxony wheel, and the other one is the Schacht Matchless. I love both of these wheels, and it just depends on whatever I'm working on. That determines which wheel I'm going to actually use that day. But downstairs, I do also keep two bins that are kind of hidden away so you can't tell really what's in them. But in one of the bins is spinning fiber that I'm working on at that moment, and the other bin is sock yarn that I'm about to crank in that moment. And so again, this idea of having different stations depending on what you're going to be doing and what do you need around you. So if I'm cranking socks, then I want my yarn for the sock knitting to be handy and close by. If I'm spinning, I want the fiber that I'm going to be working on close by as well. And so it's almost like having multiple stations for storing either the materials that you're using at the moment versus the materials that you're archiving for later use. So it might seem like you have fiber everywhere or yarn everywhere, but really it is that you need some fiber and yarn to be more accessible than others. Some of it can be stored away for later use, for archiving, to keep it for years if you want to, but others you might be working on right now, and so you need to have that ready and handy. So that is basically how I have gone about organizing all of the things that I use for my yarn activities, spinning activities, fiber craft activities. I know it involves a lot of materials, yarn, spinning fiber, raw materials, and it involves a lot of equipment, either looms or machines, as well as all of the bits and pieces that come with those machines, whether it's reeds and warping boards and shuttles and bobbins. There's a lot of pieces, but the idea is that if you can organize your space around stations and have all of the things, the tools and the supplies that you need readily at hand, either by using a cart system like this or by having bins that are close by, all of that is really helpful for making more efficient and hopefully more enjoyable. So that is basically it for today. I would love to hear about how you organize your space. If you have your yarn stash out and available and ready to look at, or if you have it stored away, how you store your equipment, where you put all your bits and pieces that you need to do all the crafts that you do. I know I've tried to set up my spaces so that they're a little bit more efficient, so that I'm not spending so much time, precious time, looking for things as opposed to actually making things. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, please do hit the like button. If you would like to see more content like this, please do hit subscribe. We come here every week and we talk about something to do with the challenges of being a multi-craftual maker. We talk about the fiber arts, we talk about knitting and spinning and weaving and dyeing, and I talk a lot about craft and color. So I hope that you'll join us for another one. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you in the next one. All right, bye for now.